Good morning, everyone. Just a comment or two before Brother Dan speaks to us. Uh, Pat said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to make a few comments." She said, "Don't grumble." So I'm not. Uh, a few years ago, I can't remember how many, 5, 6 years, 7 maybe, in Mississippi, I met a young man named Sam, and he was preaching in a congregation an hour or so away from us in Oxford. But I met him briefly, and then we got to talking some, communicating, and I just was really impressed. He's just one of those young men that really makes an impression on you as a serious and joyful Bible student, you know. And so we began to study and talk about things, and it wasn't long before he invited me to a Zoom study he was organizing with several preachers and people he knew, and I said, "Sure, I'd love to do that." So we were doing it on Zoom, and Dan, who is Sam's father, was involved in that study. I believe we did Ezekiel first. Anyway, we did several over a period of time, Zoom studies in the Old Testament, and I was just floored. It was such a good study, but I was really thankful to get to know Dan that way, and his knowledge of the Bible was just amazing, and his knowledge of the Old Testament in particular, he really just gave me a lot of things to think about as we were studying, and I appreciate it, and so glad he's able to be here, and Tammy, his wife, able to be here, and I hope you'll be able to get to know them this week, and maybe blessed to know Sam, and I don't know the others as well, but that would be a blessing too if that opportunity is afforded. At any rate, I'm really looking forward to it, and let's begin with a prayer if we could, and let Brother Dan speak to us. Holy Father, how privileged we are in so many ways, richly blessed. You're faithful in that. You've been faithful in that. And now we have this time together to study and look into your word, this time together in our Lord Jesus to understand more of your glory through him. We thank you for the privilege. We look forward to our time together this week. We pray your blessings on Brother Dan as he speaks to us and the time we'll have together to share with him. Thank you so much, Father, for the reminders that we have from your word about our mission. Help us to keep it in front of us. Help us to study with that in mind, understanding how we can somehow be instruments in bringing redemption. Bless us in this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
This is a class, so you raise your hand, you want to make a comment, etc. We're going to go through this kind of quickly at times, and then we'll pause through it. But if you want to make a comment, ask a question, jump in. This is a class. My objective is to promote a greater faith through some of the evidence that a book of Genesis displays is in the book. That's my hope. Faith is so important, but if it doesn't cause me to do something, it's not worth much. And so, but what would you be like? What would I be like if I had double the faith I actually had? Would I be much more busy? I think I would be busy for the Lord. I'm busy in that way. And so, what I want to do with this lesson is to see how rich Genesis is in the shadow for the New Testament. And that's what I want to do. In tonight's lesson, I'm not going to, I kind of changed my mind. I want to show the evidence that if you're believing, but maybe you struggle sometimes, I want to give you some vitamins for your faith. I want you to get a shot in your arm is what I really want you to have for you, because it's important as we go through this spiritual journey that we're all on. So the key part here is the types and shadows for this morning. You know, we look back 2024, and we're looking back, clear back to the book of Genesis, and it's got 2,300 plus years of history. I don't know if you think about it this way, but I do ever since I realized this. I don't know when it was. But from Exodus all the way to Revelation, you only have about 1,500 years. So the book of Genesis is like a Bible in itself. And it really is. I would like to spend a lot more time on that thought. But Genesis as a unit itself is huge. And so we look back on that. I want to show you an argument that to me is a powerful argument, that it's of God, that it just can't have happened. What I wanted to do tonight, and I changed my mind because it's a little more technical and heady, and it's like, do I have time to develop it? I probably don't, but I don't have to know where a diamond comes from to appreciate a diamond. Now, my wife probably appreciates diamond different than I do. I got my angle grinder, and I got a diamond bit, man. I tell you what, I can cut. I mean, I go right through it because of the toughness of diamond. I don't have to know where everything comes from, but to appreciate what it is. And I want you to see how inspired and accurate and marvelous. You know, if my hand has to come first, and then the shadow, right? Isn't that the way it works? You have to have the object first, and then create the. God in the Old Testament put the shadow down first, and then the real thing came in after. And when you realize the prophecy, it just opens up the world. And so we're going to go through this kind of quickly. But if you want to stop me, you stop me. The birth of Abraham, not the birth. Abraham at 75 years old was given a promise that his seed, he would have a nation. Now he's 75 years old, and he's leaving Ur, and then he leaves Haran. And so that promise is given of a nation. Didn't have one yet, all right, but I'll go. Genesis 15, he brings that promise up again because it hadn't happened. And God says, come out. I don't know if he's in a tent or not, but come out. Look up at the stars. Can you count those stars? And Abraham believed God, and it was counted, it was considered, it was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness. Trust his word. All right, I believe it. Genesis 16 comes along, and they've got to figure out their own way to try to have a birth, right? Man, that goes bad. That goes south. Hagar comes into the picture. Unfulfilled. They try it their own way. God says, nope, that's not what I mean. And then about 99 years old, next year you're going to have a son, and Abraham, you see Abraham laughing, and Sarah had her laugh because it was kind of, he's almost 100, and she's about 90, and it's almost comical, and it was to them comical, but they try to hold it down, you know. No, God's serious. Isaac is laughter, but God's serious. And sure enough, the next year, that birth happened. And you know, from 75 all the way up to the birth, about when he's 100, it's build up, build up, build up. Now, L.A. Mott made this point, and Rick Mott, his son, I was in college with, he said it to me, it's like, I've marveled at this point ever since. So, if I say stuff, originality is forgetting where you got it, but I'm going to give L.A. Mott credit for this. This is a great point. You'd think that would be the end of the story. And I know it's not. Just kind of hold that thought there for a minute, because that's the buildup. Literarily, from a literary standpoint of view, it's the buildup of the birth, the birth, the birth. You don't have any idea what's coming next. You don't. I don't. Not in the story. I want to see something promised, and I said I would not. Okay, there it is. Keep hold of that, my cord. The birth of the Messiah, first laid down in Genesis 15. The seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. That was first given. And then promised to Abraham is through his seed, all the family of the Jews thought it was us. God's going to bless the world through us. No. Through one Jew, the Messiah. That's what Paul says, Galatians 3. Then promised through David that one of his son, descendant, would be on the throne. I would be a father to him, and he'd be a son to me, and he'll build a temple, and he'll be on the throne forever. That's that seed promise. Build up. And then, about the time Jesus is born, Joseph realizes she's with child, and it's not me. But he is told it's of the Holy Spirit. And that satisfies him. He gets up and marries her right away. And then the birth. And you'd think that'd be the build up, the end of the story. But it's not the end of the story. That's a Christmas story. That's a watered down, twisted view, is what that is. That's not the end of the story. The big thing that no one expected is that promised child of Abraham would be offered as a sacrifice. And obviously, the promised child of Jesus, that's the pinnacle of the story, of the sacrifice. And so the whole buildup, literally, in the Old Testament is the shadow of Jesus. That's not the final story. Now, that greatest act of Abraham, and this morning about Caleb, and his zeal. And man, you look at the faith of Abraham, this to me is the greatest act of faith that Abraham will display. And it's toward the end of his life of walking with God that whole time. Now, let me just stop here and ask, because I wanted this as a class. What do you see as a type with Abraham and Isaac? What are some things in that story that ring true to you, that you see the type part? That's like, this is from God. This is obviously a shadow before God. What part of that story? And there was silence in heaven for half an hour.
The repeated pattern.
Yes, the repeated pattern. That's exactly right. Anybody else?
Mentions his only son several times.
Excellent. And he also had this Ishmael, right? But in the New Testament, that only begotten word from Hebrews 11, that's right. That's Isaac. That's exactly right. Excellent. All right, let me just walk through a little bit. We're not going to read it because I've got two of these I want to get done. And we stop at what time? Lunchtime. All right. So the only begotten, that's the technical word. They don't know how to translate. I don't know how to translate exactly, but it's the only, the unique, the one and only, or begotten. It's that special son. And you're right. That's what Abraham was offering. And by the way, let me throw this in. If you read in Genesis 21, and you realize he has to send Ishmael away with bread and a thing of water to see his son, would that hurt a dad? Would that hurt? Was God serious? He sent him away. The very next chapter, when he says, offer me your son as a sacrifice. He didn't stop me with Ishmael. Why would he stop me with Isaac? He did. You said it, okay, I'm going to do it. I'll kill him, but you've got to raise him back because you promised. You promised. I'm going to kill him, but you've got to raise him back. And in his mind, he was dead. So verse 2, and you know the story in Genesis 22, your son, and it's repeated, now take your son, your only son, whom you love, that only begotten son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and one of the mountains. And so he goes to a mountain, and it's Moriah. And where's the temple built? On Mount Moriah. Wow. Same general area. It looks like it's the same general area where the Jesus would be offered, just outside the temple in the land of Moriah. 3 days the father walked knowing his son was dead. What does Abraham do the very next morning when he gets up after God tells him to do this? He doesn't tell Sarah. At least the Bible doesn't say he tells her. I don't think I'd tell my wife if I was going to do this. He chops the wood. He gets the wood ready. That's what he does. The son carries the wood. In the Greek, it's xulon, and then it's used in the New Testament as the cross. And I think as a father, Larry, would you take the the wood you chopped up in that morning, and they probably carried it on the donkey, or the animal, the mount, and the 2 servants that was with you. And now you got to go up to the mountain. Would you have one of your sons carry up the wood, or the donkey carry the wood, or the servant? Yeah, get one of the servants to do it. No, who carries the wood up the mountain? Yeah, the Son. The Son carries the wood, the burden. And it's the same word in the New Testament, sometimes translated as cross, although there's another word for cross in the New Testament. Staurao is the verb. The son willing? Does Isaac seem just willing to do whatever God says? I don't know how old he was. It's just amazing. His willingness to submit to the Father. And then raised up by divine intervention, because if God hadn't stopped him, he would be dead. And so that is just, to me, it's the hand mark. It's the signature of God putting a shadow down before the real thing came. Now, I love this passage. I'm just going to put it up here. Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it will be provided." Now, he didn't say he did provide. The idea, or it does provide, or it has provided, but it will be provided. Because on that mount, about 2,000 years later, the real thing was provided on that mount. And so, the statement, God says to Abraham, "Now I know that you fear me." And I know we can talk back and forth about, oh, God knew beforehand, etc. I understand that. But the statement, "Now I know," and at some point it has to hit you. Now I know. What's our response? What should we say at that point? Now I know how much God loves me. I know this is kind of a weird way of saying it, but it seems almost as if he loved me more than he loved his own son. Why would he do that? I mean, why would he do that? Now we should know how much God cares for us. That's our response to that. Another story ends with the greatest, I think it's the greatest shadow of the Old Testament. And it's the story of Joseph. It's the story that shadows the greatest story of all time. It's from Genesis 37 to 50. He ends, why the best for last? Well, that's God's style. Joseph, this is tremendous. And I want you to see it. I want it to impart of you. Now this is, again, I say it's my lesson in my class, but Stephen didn't get a chance to finish his sermon. Did you know that? That always bothers me. They killed him before they finished it. Now he starts off with 3 guys, of Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. And he's basically making, especially when he gets to Joseph and Moses, this idea that I call it the Rudolph effect sometimes. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you know. He's the one that everybody disliked, and yet he becomes the hero of the story. They did that to Joseph. They did it to Moses. You're doing just as your fathers did. And you've done it to Jesus, whom you rejected. But he's become the chief cornerstone. So, in this Stephen's speech, he mentions they were jealous of Joseph. They sold Joseph, and yet God was with him. He becomes governor of the land. And he made known to his brethren on the second visit. I may not get that far. That's that's Stephen's point. On the second visit, he makes himself known. And then he invites the whole family to come live with him. Now, if I don't get to this part, they sold Jesus. They were jealous of Jesus. He becomes the governor of the world. And he says, leave all your stuff on earth and come to me. They doubted Joseph's forgiveness, didn't the brothers? They doubted, just like we sometimes doubt if God's really forgiven me. But Jesus is a better Joseph. And his heart is deeper than Joseph. I'll talk about that tonight. Now, I'm going from Keynote to PowerPoint. It doesn't quite go as fast, so I want to zip through this, but it's not. Anyways, now I'm grumbling, right? Okay. He has a dream about them bowing down to Joseph, right? The brothers. And then the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to Joseph. Now his dad retains those things in his heart, just like Mary in the New Testament retained those things in her heart. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, and we'll get to a point where we'll stop. They became jealous of Joseph. And we know that Pilate knew, you handed Jesus over to me because you were jealous of Jesus. That's the real reason, and Pilate knew it. He could see it. In Genesis 37, 13 to 14, Dad, Jacob, commissions Joseph, the shepherd, to go check on the flock and your brothers. Go see how they're doing. He's commissioned. We know Jesus says, I didn't come on my own initiative, he says, at the end of 42. Not on my own, but he sent me. God commissioned Jesus. And he sent him. I'll talk more about that a little bit this week. He commissioned as a shepherd. Isn't all the good guys in the Bible are shepherds? I mean, it's a marvelous thing, but Jesus is the shepherd, and Joseph was a shepherd. They plotted his death. Now, in my keynote, they line up the two E's, but you get the idea. They plotted the death. Here comes this dreamer. We're going to kill him, and we'll throw him in a pit. They plotted his death in the storyline. And we know they plotted against Jesus. If you do the chronology from about Wednesday on, the plan was to get him. That's when Judas made the deal. In 23 to 24, they stripped Joseph of his tunic. And we know when they crucified Jesus, he also had a tunic, that they stripped him of his tunic. And if you're reading it in not the original, his Hebrew, but in Greek, if you're reading in Greek, it's the same word. They stripped him of his tunic. 25 to 28 is just so unbelievable for me. Who suggested of the boys? Which boy said, hey, you know what? Let's don't kill him. We wouldn't profit, but let's sell him. Who was the boy who said, let's sell him? I know now we're afraid to ask. That's the problem having a class in the auditorium. I'm serious. Nobody wants to speak up in the auditorium, and I get that. No, I do. But if we were in a class setting, we would talk and we'd all speak up. Who sold? Well, say again? Judah. Excellent. Thank you. That's right. Judah. Hey. Let's sell him. And we know Judas in the New Testament. But if you're reading this from the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, you know it's spelled exactly the same way? Judas. Exact spelled the same way. Judah in the Old Testament. Judas in the Old Testament. Let's sell him. It's Judas in the New Testament. I'm going to sell him. Laying out our hands. We're not going to do the dirty work of killing Joseph. We'll let somebody else do that part. And the Jews, let's give them to Pilate. Pilate will crucify him. He can do the dirty work. Not their own hands on him. When does the Old Testament Judas decide, let's sell him? Genesis 37, verse 25. I'm sorry to go so fast. I just want you to see the big picture. You got the PowerPoints and the verses later. You can look them if you want to. But in 37, verse 25, then they sat down to eat a meal. Now, why is that said there? During the meal, wasn't it? When Judas decided, I'm going to go through with it. And that's when Jesus, and while they were eating, he said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. And you know the hard part, and David felt this. When Ahithophel, is a guy who ate my bread and drank my cup, and he lifted up his heel against me. I mean, you ate together. It was during a meal. As cold, can you sit there and eat a meal with the guy you're going to try to kill? Judah of the Old Testament felt that way about Joseph. And Judas felt that way about Jesus. It was during a meal. He did that. 20 pieces of silver. That's what he got. And New Testament, I know, it's 30 pieces. Got to count for inflation, right? And it's true, really, if you go back and look. Kenneth Kitchen will make this point about the slave in the Old Testament is about 20 pieces of silver. And New Testament is about 30. And Zechariah will tell us exactly, because he's counting for inflation, Zechariah is, of the 30 pieces of silver. So the sins of Israel, sons of Israel, let me just walk through them. They were jealous, they hated them, they premeditated murder. I put that italicized. They didn't actually do it, but you get the idea. They lied to a dad and they sold him. And Stephen's point is you're doing just what your fathers did. Did that hit him? Let me say something about preaching. I'm sure the preachers are the same way. You preach general lessons, and someone will say, "Man, you felt like you were just preaching on me." Have you felt that way? My own son says that to me. "Dad, you feel like you're preaching to me." It's like, I'm not trying. But I will make this analogy. I was in Arkansas, and I wasn't at the house for the preacher's house they had, and I was with my mom. It's a long story, but my grass grew big, and I'm feeling bad about it, And I got to myself, if one of those people, they tell me, "Dan, your backyard, you really should mow that." It's like, I couldn't get to it. It's like, if you'd have said that to me, you'd have bugged me. That would have bothered me. Because there's some truth in it. Even though I wasn't living there, it's like, I should have been doing it, right? If you tell me, "Dan, you don't love your wife very much, you're not with her very much, you don't really care about it," it ain't going to bother me a bit. It doesn't affect me. I know it's not true. But if it's close to being true, it affects us. When Stephen made this point to that audience, it internalized them because they begin to see themselves that we did it to Joseph, we did it to Moses, and now we've done it to the Son of God? No! And they killed him because they saw it. Now, Stephen didn't get to finish his sermon. The fellow prisoners. I stop at what time?
Ring the first bell about 5 to.
About 5 till.
The first bell.
First bell. So we're going to go up to the very end.
Yeah, we good.
All right, I guess I'm going too fast.
We can ring it earlier if you need.
No. Go with me to Genesis 40. This is, to me, my favorite part. Can I have a favorite? I think my son Sam had the best answer for that. What's your favorite book? Whatever happened, I have to be studying. But I love this section. So read it with me, and I want you to point out what you see here in this passage. In Genesis 40, verse 20 to 23, "Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." What do you see there? You can see where I'm going. What do you see in this passage?
the obvious parallel.
Tell me. I know. I hate to ask the question that's the obvious. I know, but say it to me.
One thief was going to be with him in paradise, the other one.
Excellent.
And they both had been hurling insults at him.
Excellent. What else do you see?
He forgot Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right. That kills you. When you read the story, it's like, for how long? 2 years? It's like, wow. He just left them in prison. So here's my take. One freed, one hanged. Actually, they both were raised up. And I agree with your point. Joseph forgotten. Jesus forsaken. Jesus' fellow prisoners. Who was freed? Who was the prisoner with Jesus that got to go free? Yeah, Barabbas. One freed. I say 2 were hanged, but one guy, I love his statement, remember me. And Jesus tells him he would remember him. There would be. And Jesus forsaken. And salvation in the whole story. Isn't it true? When the cupbearer remembers, when he hears Pharaoh's dream, and he didn't understand what that means. Oh, but there's this guy in prison. He interpreted my dream and the baker's dream exactly like it happened, and it turned out that guy, he can do that. And so go get him. The whole story changes at the moment when Jesus is remembered, when Joseph is remembered. Bread and fruit of the vine. When we remember him. Isn't that it there? Am I making this up? Is this figments of my imagination? Or is God laying down He's laying down a shadow before it comes to pass? And that's the divine signature, because nobody can do that but God. Nobody can know the history before God and have it written in such a way, inspired, so that when the real thing happens, you could, I know you can't see it beforehand. And you couldn't. And I don't think it's designed to see it beforehand. As you know, when I was younger, I think, if they knew the prophecies, why didn't they recognize Jesus? Have you felt that way? And have you felt like they should have saw him come? It's like, it's just not written, but it's written after the fact. To thinking through it and reading and trying to meditate and digest. It's like, that's happened. It's the shadow. Jump in here.
That just made me think about all of this. This is written down by Moses hundreds of years after Abraham had lived. And Stephen says he was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians. And it's almost as if God prepares Moses to be able to write down all of these clues to what he's doing, looking back hundreds of years, thousands of years, and writing down these clues. It's an amazing thing.
It is an amazing thing. And it's not written like a prophecy. But once you know the story, and it's like all of a sudden, the Karate Kid, I love that thing, wax on, wax off. Like the old guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, I'll do this. And then when he begins to fight, it's like, oh, that's what he was teaching me. Now, it's the Old Testament. God is making them wax on, wax off. Even, and then this is a different story, but with the lamb. How many boys asked their dad, Dad, why do we got to kill this lamb and not break any of its bones? Why is God concerned about it's a dead animal? Come on. Why is this big deal? God said so. It's there. Wax on, wax off. Because they didn't break his bones, did they? It's the shadow he was laying down before it happened. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If you're reading through Genesis, and I will say this, I'm chopping it up, I know, just for this lesson. It's best when you read it from one to the other. And I want to say this as a side point. I really hope you're spending time, whether it's in the morning. Sometimes, man, we got it on our phones. I can listen to the audio book when I'm doing something when you're in the car. I really hope you're taking time just to read the Bible, hear it spoken through the day. Charge your batteries. When you do that, the story starts in 37 with Joseph going to see his brothers. And all of a sudden we're thrown in this chapter 38 about the whole house of Judah. Was wicked in his sight. And then Onan with Er's wife was wicked and God kills him. And Judah himself, he goes into his daughter-in-law. And the moment I think happens for Judah of the Old Testament as when he says, she's more righteous than I. And then Judah will end up taking a leading role among the boys later. And that's important because he steps up. Judah does. In the Old Testament, he steps up, not like the New Testament. But why are we told? I mean, literally, 37 begins Joseph, and 39, we're going to go right back to Joseph. Why do I have a whole chapter about Judah, and Onan? It's like, I don't want to know those details. That's too much information, right? Why are we told that? I want to suggest to you why we're told that. Because Joseph was just like of the family and flesh and blood like Judah. And in 39, when Joseph is tempted, just like and Onan and Judah, did he succumb to the same temptation? Lust is a powerful thing. And Joseph controlled himself. He was tempted in all points, like his brothers. And he doesn't fall. Appreciate Joseph. Appreciate Jesus. I used to read the story as if I was Joseph. You ever do that? I'll be the leading character. I'll be the good guy. You get a little older, you realize, I failed. I failed. Times when I could stop my swearing. I became a Christian. I was 18, out of the world. I could stop my swearing like that. For the most part. One time during a Cubs game, why did it come out of my mouth? But lust was very difficult to come out of. Joseph, same tempted, like his brother, but without sin. And Jesus was tempted in every way we were, without sin. He was innocent. Joseph was innocent, although they put him in what? They were put him in a prison. Imagine that. 2 years in prison for what? And he was numbered with the transgressors. Treated as a prisoner. Was a prisoner. But he wasn't. The jailer, Potiphar, didn't want to harm Joseph. Wonder why Joseph wasn't killed, huh? He's a slave. Do that to the master's wife in the Old Testament, in Egypt, off with your head. But he doesn't. He doesn't. Something to the story. Maybe he knew his wife a little bit too. Pilate didn't want to harm Jesus either. He knew he was innocent. Tried to get him off. He scourged him, trying to get the Jews. Does that satisfy you? Does that satisfy you? You beat the guy to a pulp. No. Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate wanted to get him off. Joseph had a divine spirit, Pharaoh says. And Joseph was the only one that was able, and in the New Testament, obviously, Jesus is the only one. He has a divine spirit in truth. Now, I love this passage for Joseph's sake, because they made him ride in the second chariot. And as they went along, what did the guys say before Joseph's chariot? Joseph's chariot. I'll say it right. Bow the knee. And it wasn't by choice. You better bow the knee. And they all bowed the knee to Joseph. And we know the passage in parallel. That every knee will bow. And the good thing is, we can bow now when I don't have to. Isn't that good? I mean, I can bow now because one day every knee will bow, and it won't be by their choice. They're going to bow, but I can bow now to honor him. When did Joseph stand before Pharaoh? I know. Isn't that incredible? When? How old was he? He was 30. 41 verse 6. And we know Jesus was about 30. A little younger, a little older, don't know for sure. About 30 when he began his public ministry, according to Luke. They didn't know him, did they? When the brothers came before Joseph. They didn't know him, didn't recognize him. He was in the world was made through him, and the world didn't. They didn't know him. Can the creation not know the Creator? John sees the irony in that. And John the Baptist said, I didn't recognize him. I didn't recognize him. There's a whole sermon there, but I'm not going to go there right now. He appears to the 10 brothers. What was the brother that was missing with Joseph? Who was that brother that they didn't bring? The little guy? Yeah, Benjamin. So they only had 10. The next time they appear, they have Benjamin's with them. They have 11. Jesus, when he appears the first time, who's missing? Yeah, Thomas. He's not there. And then the second time, the next time he appears, then a week after, Thomas is there. And I just want to say full disclosure when the 11 arrive. And what is the one thing Thomas says that's so important to the theme of John's Gospel? What does Thomas say when he sees the hand and what does he say? Has full disclosure. I mean, Jesus is acknowledging before they didn't really. It's like Joseph taking off. They realize it's their brother Joseph. Full disclosure. The second time, he's God. If you're going to come from the grave, I'm not going to believe it. Put my hand. He's my Lord and my God. And Jesus doesn't rebuke him because he's right. Because he's God. God sent me. Isn't that good for Joseph? The brothers feeling bad for what they did to him. And Joseph makes the best possible spin. You ever do that with your stories? Make the best possible spin on the story? Those brothers, those rascals. But remember, Judah does change. When they come back, is Judah a changed person? He's a changed person. And he tells before the second in command of Pharaoh, he says, take me instead of Benjamin. He's stepping up. And Joseph says, God sent me. And we know God's the one who sent Jesus. Did they doubt his forgiveness? When Dad dies, when Jacob dies, Dad's died now. Now Joseph is going to give us, he's going to give us what we really deserve. And they approach, they're scared, aren't they? Do you feel that little bit way with Jesus? Do you feel a little bit, am I going to get paid back for all the things I've done wrong? You kind of concerned about that? I don't think that will ever leave us fully. I just want to say, Joseph did forgive his brothers. And he did say, just leave all your stuff in Canaan, because I'm going to provide for you here. And one day, we're going to leave all our junk on earth, and we're going to go to the one who is greater than Joseph. I want to say this about the book of Genesis. It's not possible that the book is not of God. It's just not possible to put the shadow down before the real thing happens. And that means we're going to meet somebody that's better than Joseph. I appreciate the good attention for class.